The air on Vorthak smelled like burnt circuitry and desperation. Jake Mallory had smelled both plenty of times before. The former meant a battlefield ripe for scavenging. The latter meant he wasn't the only one looking. He adjusted the cracked visor of his scav suit, muttering to himself as he stepped over the blackened shell of a Zentari walker. "Yeah, Mallory," he said under his breath, voice thick with mock cheer. "Come to a war-torn hellscape. The pay's terrible, the hours are worse. But hey, you might find a toaster you can pawn for lunch money." The war had moved on from this sector days ago, leaving behind a graveyard of twisted metal and shattered lives. Now it was a playground for the brave, or the stupid. Jake liked to think he was a little of both. He picked his way carefully across the battlefield, his boots crunching on scorched ground. His scanner pinged faintly, a weak energy reading up ahead. Jake grinned. Energy readings usually meant tech, and tech meant profit. He tightened his grip on the scanner and moved toward the source, stepping over the occasional skeletal mech limb. "Come on, Daddy needs a new plasma coil," he murmured, the prospect of salvaging something worthwhile pushing him forward. When he reached the source, his grin faltered. It wasn't a plasma coil. It was a body. Jake froze. His scav suit was decent for protection against stray drones and radiation pockets, but nothing about this place screamed, "safe to linger." The figure lay half-buried under a chunk of Zentari armor plating, their silver skin catching the faint light filtering through the orange haze. Ithari, Jake realized, one of the alien species fighting in this endless galactic tug-of-war. Not that he cared much about who was winning. As far as Jake was concerned, the Zentari and the Ithari could keep killing each other as long as they left Earth alone, but this Ithari was alive. Barely. Her eyes fluttered open, the glow in them dim but unmistakable. She looked up at Jake, lips parting to speak. "Help." Her voice was faint but clear, cutting through the low hum of the battlefield like a laser blade. "Help me." Jake scratched the back of his helmet. "Ah, see, that's not really my thing. I'm more of a watch and let fate decide kind of guy." She blinked at him, her expression a mixture of exhaustion and irritation. "You must help. It's vital." "Vital," Jake echoed, crouching beside her. "Vital like, I need a med kit? Or vital like, the galaxy's at stake and you're my only hope?" She coughed weakly, her silver blood staining the dust beneath her. "The second one." Jake groaned. "Of course it's the second one." He looked over his shoulder, scanning for signs of Zentari patrols. The air was still for now, but he knew better than to trust the silence. "All right," he said, more to himself than her. "Against my better judgment, let's see what we can do here." Jake pried away the armor plating, pinning her down, grunting as he shifted the heavy metal. The Ithari winced but didn't cry out. Her resilience impressed him. Not that he'd say it out loud. He had a reputation for apathy to maintain. "Name's Jake Mallory," he said, dragging her free. "Earth's finest scavenger. Well, only scavenger in this quadrant, probably. What's yours?" "Kathira," she managed. "Nice to meet you, Kathira. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to point out that I'm risking my neck here, so if you've got any death curses or dangerous exes, let's keep those to ourselves." Her lips twitched in what might have been a smile. "Noted." Jake slung her arm over his shoulder, supporting her as they stumbled toward the wreckage of a Zentari transport. It was risky to head into something so conspicuous, but it was closer than his skimmer, and Kathira didn't look like she'd make it far. Inside the transport, Jake set her down on a relatively intact crate. He activated the basic med kit he carried and began treating her wounds, his hands surprisingly steady for someone who claimed not to care. "So," he said, breaking the silence, "what's so important that you're out here bleeding silver and begging for help from a guy who hasn't showered in 2 days?" Kathira's eyes met his, the glow in them stronger now. "I carry something my people need. A key. Without it, we will fall." Jake frowned. "A key? Like a literal key? Because if it's just a door problem, I'm great at breaking locks." She shook her head weakly. "Number A neural key, the Etheri fleet, hidden beneath this world, It will turn the tide of the war. Jake leaned back, his skepticism evident. Hidden fleet? Neural key? Lady, you're hitting all the sci-fi tropes at once. You got a mysterious prophecy to go with it? Jake. Her voice was steadier now, carrying a weight that silenced his sarcasm. If they find me, they will destroy us all. You must help me get to the control hub. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. You know, I could have just walked away, pretended I didn't see you. But no, I had to play the hero. He smirked, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. All right, Kathira, let's save the galaxy, or die trying. The faint hum of approaching drones interrupted the moment. Jake glanced toward the door. Time to move, he said, his tone light but his grip firm as he helped Kathira to her feet. And for the record, if we survive this, you owe me dinner. Earth cuisine, none of that glowing algae stuff. As they stumbled out of the transport, the drones drew closer, their ominous red lights piercing the haze. Dinner? Kathira said, her voice laced with dry humor despite the danger. Jake grinned. Hey, if we're saving the galaxy, we might as well enjoy ourselves. The chase was on. Jake and Kathira moved quickly through the wreckage, careful to stay out of the drone's line of sight. The soft thrum of their engines vibrated through the cracked ground, making Jake's stomach churn with the anticipation of being caught. He adjusted his helmet, checking the data feed on his visor. The drone signature was still low, but that wouldn't last long. Don't suppose you have a cloaking device in that shiny backpack of yours? Jake asked, glancing sideways at Kathira. Her silver skin shimmered faintly in the dim light, and she moved with a fluid grace that made Jake feel like a clunky piece of machinery in comparison. No cloaking device, she replied tersely, her voice steady despite the situation. But I do have other methods. Jake raised an eyebrow. Other methods? Kathira's lips quirked up in the smallest of smiles. You don't get to be an Aetheri soldier without picking up a few tricks. She crouched low, her eyes scanning the horizon for danger. Stay close. I'll guide us. Jake followed her, trying to match her pace. It wasn't easy. He was used to being alone, moving at his own speed. But now, with a half-conscious alien soldier at his side, the urgency had kicked in. They had to get out of here. So, tell me more about this neural key of yours, Jake said, trying to keep his voice light. Humor was his way of coping. It had always been. If he didn't laugh at the absurdity of the galaxy, he'd lose his mind. Kathira glanced at him. You think I'm joking? Jake smirked. Well, you're an alien warrior with glowing eyes, a silver body, and a mysterious key that could save your people. Kind of sounds like a bad B-movie plot. She rolled her eyes. You humans and your movies. No, Jake, this is very real. Yeah, well, I'm not convinced, Jake said, adjusting the weight of his pack. So this neural key, what's it actually do? It's not just a USB stick with secret intel, right? Kathira sighed, a soft, almost amused sound. No, it's not a USB stick. Well, that's a relief. I hate dealing with tech support, Jake quipped. I can never figure out which port to plug into. USB-C, micro USB, the magic one? Who knows? Kathira's laugh was a quiet, melodic thing, and Jake was momentarily taken aback. He hadn't expected her to actually laugh. She looked over at him, her eyes gleaming with something like appreciation. You're strange, she said softly. Flattery will get you everywhere, Jake replied, grinning. But seriously, what does this key do? I've never been a fan of cryptic explanations. The smile faded from Kathira's face, replaced by a more somber expression. She motioned for him to follow as she led them into the remains of an old Aetheri base, its once sleek silver walls now marred by blaster fire and shrapnel. The neural key is part of a network, she said, her voice low. A network that connects all Aetheri ships, all Aetheri soldiers. It holds the combined knowledge of our people, our strategies, our history, and it can activate the ancient fleet buried beneath Vorthax. Jake blinked. An entire fleet? You mean like warships, right? The kind that make giant explosions and probably have some sort of massive laser cannons? Kathira nodded. Yes, exactly. Jake's eyes widened. Now that sounds like something I'd want to see, and blow up, but I'm assuming you don't just hand out fleet access codes to anyone? Not anyone, she said, her tone serious again. It's not just a matter of power, it's a matter of survival. If the Zentari find me, they will kill me and erase the key. She met his gaze. If they find the key without me, they'll use it against us. Jake paused. So, you're saying you're not just some random soldier with a cool weapon and an even cooler glow. You're the person who holds the future of your entire species in your hands. She nodded, her face unreadable. In a sense. Jake chewed on that, trying to process it. In the grand scheme of things, he was a guy who had made a living off taking things that didn't belong to him, not exactly the noble type. But now, here he was, stuck in a fight for something bigger than himself. He wasn't sure how he felt about that. So what now? Jake asked, finally breaking the silence. We just keep running and hoping for the best? No, Kathira replied, turning her back to him. She walked to the far side of the room, where an old terminal blinked faintly with power. We make a plan. Jake raised an eyebrow. A plan? You sure that's a good idea? Last time I tried making a plan, I ended up stealing a shipment of fake diamonds and getting chased by angry space pirates. Not exactly my finest hour. Kathira's lips twitched again, and this time Jake could tell it was a smile. I'm not asking for your pirating expertise, Jake. Phew, that's a relief, he said, grinning. The last thing I need is to be stuck with some pirate code of honor. I have enough trouble keeping track of my own bad decisions. Kathira didn't respond immediately, her attention focused on the terminal. She plugged the neural key into the interface, her fingers flying over the holographic screen. Jake hovered nearby, watching as the terminal hummed to life, projecting a three-dimensional map of the planet. Several zones lit up in red, indicating Zentari patrols. He frowned. Well, that's not good, he muttered. Looks like we're pretty much surrounded. Kathira didn't look up. It's not as bad as it seems. Jake's frown deepened. I beg to differ. She turned to him, a rare spark of humor in her eyes. You said you wanted a plan, didn't you? Jake blinked, then smiled. Oh, you've got a plan? Well, in that case, I'm in. But if we die, I'm blaming you. Just saying. Fair enough, she said, turning back to the map. We'll need to move through the old underground tunnels. It's the fastest way to the control hub, but we'll need to disable the drones first. I can do that, but you'll need to keep them distracted. Jake grinned. Ah, now you're speaking my language. Distraction is my middle name. Well, not really, but you get the point. Kathira gave him a dry look. Just don't blow anything up unless absolutely necessary. No promises, Jake replied, winking. Kathira didn't seem convinced, but she nodded anyway. We leave in 10 minutes, she said, her voice sharp and decisive. Prepare yourself, Jake Mallory. This won't be easy. Jake grinned. Easy is overrated. He slapped his palms together. All right, let's save the galaxy, one sarcastic comment at a time. And with that, the duo, an unlikely pair of scavenger and soldier, prepared to face the enemy and whatever lay ahead. Together. The underground tunnels of Vorthax were nothing like the sleek, sterile chambers of Ithari warships. Instead of chrome-plated walls and holographic interfaces, they were a labyrinth of ancient concrete, exposed pipes, and rusted metal doors, some of which still emitted faint sparks. The whole place hummed with a strange, almost organic energy, like it was alive, and just waiting for the right moment to reveal its secrets. Jake Mallory, ever the skeptic, wasn't buying the romance of it. He had been in enough rundown facilities to know that the reality of these places usually involved creepy crawlies and malfunctioning security systems. He was already half expecting a blast door to come slamming down and trap them in some claustrophobic tomb. So, what's the deal with these tunnels? Jake asked, his voice echoing in the empty space. Are we going to be dodging traps? Laser turrets? Giant mutant rats? Kathira, who had been leading the way with her usual quiet confidence, glanced over her shoulder. The faint light from her glowing eyes illuminated the dark passage ahead. "None of those, thankfully," she said dryly, though her tone suggested she was familiar with much worse. These tunnels were built as a last-ditch escape route in case of a full-scale invasion. They are more secure than the surface, but not without their issues. Issues, Jake repeated, deadpan. That's reassuring. Kathira ignored his sarcasm, her focus still ahead. The Zentari know about these tunnels. That's why we're not using the main routes. We'll take the back channels. They'll be less likely to patrol them. Jake snorted. Back channels, the preferred mode of transportation for shady deals and disgruntled workers. He raised his hand in mock salute. I see the brilliance of your plan already. Nothing could go wrong with a route named back channels. Kathira shot him a look, but there was a flicker of amusement in her expression. If you want to keep making jokes, Jake, you'll have to do it while running. We don't have time to waste. Running? Jake repeated, his voice lifting in mock disbelief. I thought we were just going to waltz through these corridors like a couple of tourists sightseeing on a death planet. Here I was thinking we had all the time in the world. The flickering lights above them buzzed in warning. Jake glanced up, half expecting something to drop from the ceiling. Instead, the only thing that happened was an echo of distant footsteps that made his stomach drop. Great. That's probably a patrol, Jake muttered. And no, I'm not looking forward to it. Kathira didn't respond immediately, but he could see her posture stiffen. Stay quiet, she ordered, her voice now steely. We can't afford to be found. Jake rolled his eyes. Oh, I'm sure that'll work out fine. I'm the best at being stealthy, he said, striding forward a little louder than necessary. Just ask my ex-wife. Kathira didn't even flinch, though Jake swore he could hear the faintest exhale of amusement from her. Let's keep moving, Mallory. They turned a corner and entered a narrow shaft, the walls closing in on both sides. The air was thick, and the faint smell of old machinery mixed with something earthy, almost like mildew. Jake felt the weight of the silence pressing down on him. It was the kind of silence that screamed something's wrong. He swallowed and tried to ignore the creeping unease. He wasn't a coward. He'd seen his fair share of dangerous places, but there was something unsettling about this one. Maybe it was the fact that no one had been here in centuries, or maybe it was the way Kathira's usual calm seemed to have shifted, like she was listening for something he couldn't hear. Can you hear that? Jake whispered, though his voice felt far too loud in the stillness. Kathira stopped, her head tilting slightly, her glowing eyes narrowing. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, and then, just as Jake was about to say something, he heard it too. The faintest sound, almost like a low hum, vibrating through the floor beneath their feet. It started soft, but it was getting louder. Closer. Shit, Jake breathed. Tell me that's just your people's version of background noise. Kathira's lips pressed together in a tight line. Number, it's not. Jake took a step back, the tension in the air thickening. So what? We're about to get ambushed by space bees? Or are we looking at some kind of mecha spider situation here? Kathira's hand snapped out, gripping his arm with surprising strength. Quiet, it's not the Zentari. Jake blinked at her, but before he could ask anything else, the humming sound morphed into a distinct grinding noise, a series of heavy mechanical clicks. Something was moving, slowly, methodically. Kathira's eyes widened, and in one swift motion, she shoved Jake toward a narrow gap between two rusty pipes. Hide! Now! Jake, too shocked to protest, scrambled into the space she had indicated, his breath coming in shallow bursts as he tried to keep still. His heart hammered in his chest, but for once his usual snark and humor were nowhere to be found. He had no idea what was coming, but judging by the way Kathira's posture had shifted into something more like predatory awareness, it wasn't anything good. From their hiding spot, Jake watched as the dim light ahead flickered one last time, then went out completely. The hum was now a constant, vibrating through the walls like the sound of some massive, unseen engine. Something heavy and immense was moving toward them. "Is this the part where you tell me what's going on?" Jake whispered. He had to ask. It was his instinct, his need to know. Kathira didn't answer immediately. Instead, her eyes locked onto something ahead. When she spoke again, her voice was low and controlled, but Jake could hear the tension in it. "It's a guardian," she said quietly, as if the word itself carried some weight. "A security system left over from the old days. If we don't move fast, it'll catch us." "A guardian?" Jake repeated. "Is that like a giant robot with a flamethrower or—" "Don't talk," Kathira cut him off, her grip on his arm tightening. "Just stay still." Jake swallowed hard, barely able to control his breathing. He could feel the vibration intensifying. Then, through the darkness, he saw it. A hulking shadow moving down the tunnel, a blur of mechanical limbs and a glowing, faceless visor. It was massive, and its movement was unnervingly precise. Jake's heart skipped a beat. He didn't know what it was, but one thing was clear. If that thing saw them, they were toast. Kathira's body was tense, her eyes fixed on the approaching guardian, her mind clearly running through options, weighing their chances. "Don't move," she whispered again, her breath steady, despite the danger. Jake tried not to breathe too loudly, his gaze never leaving the massive machine. It was only a matter of time before they would have to act. And Jake Mallory, unpredictable, sarcastic, and utterly ill-prepared, was about to face something far beyond anything he'd ever dealt with. But maybe, just maybe, he could make it out alive, or at least with a good story to tell. The massive guardian strode down the tunnel, its steps heavy enough to make the floor tremble. Jake's heart was pounding, every muscle tensed as he watched the shadowy figure glide through the dark, the faint hum of its energy field vibrating through the air. It was terrifying, like something out of a nightmare. Yet it had no face, no eyes. How did it know where they were? Jake wasn't sure he wanted to find out. "How do we take it down?" he whispered to Kathira, his voice barely a breath, his eyes glued to the guardian's glowing form. He wasn't a soldier, but even he knew they weren't going to just sneak past this thing, not unless they had some serious firepower or a really good distraction. Kathira didn't answer immediately. Her eyes flicked over the guardian's massive form, analyzing its movements, calculating. For a moment, Jake thought she might be trying to come up with a solution that didn't involve them getting vaporized, but then she did something that Jake never expected. She grinned. "Do you trust me?" Kathira asked, her voice barely audible. Jake blinked. "I'm not sure if trust is the word I'd use, but we're in this together now, aren't we?" He paused. "You're not planning on using some weird mind trick, are you? Because that never works out in movies." Kathira's grin widened. "No mind tricks, but I do have something better." She looked back at the guardian, then at Jake. "Stay here. Keep quiet. I'll handle this." Before Jake could even begin to process what she was saying, Kathira darted out of their hiding place. The guardian's sensor systems seemed to react immediately, its head swiveling towards the movement. It was a machine, after all. No matter how intimidating it looked, it operated on logic and mechanical instincts. It detected Kathira in an instant. Jake's jaw dropped. "Are you insane?" he hissed, watching her silhouette dart across the tunnel, heading toward the guardian with what appeared to be confidence. What the hell was she thinking? The guardian's massive form started to shift, its metallic limbs clicking together, moving into a ready stance, preparing to neutralize the threat. But instead of firing or lunging, it hesitated. Kathira was fast, too fast for the guardian to lock onto immediately. She darted past the hulking figure and reached a small terminal embedded in the wall of the tunnel. Her hand moved to the interface without hesitation, fingers pressing the screen with swift, precise motions. Jake was still too stunned to speak, but he was starting to piece things together. "Wait, you're hacking it?" he asked, his voice incredulous. Is that what you meant by having something better? You're just, what, going to upload a virus or something? Is this a freaking spy movie now? Kathira didn't respond, but the hum of the Guardian's movement seemed to slow. It still turned its head slowly toward her, like a massive, confused predator trying to figure out if it was dealing with a threat or a mere nuisance. The Guardian's faceplate, if you could call it a face, flickered in a way that suggested the machine was confused. Jake's eyes widened. No way, you're actually hacking into it. You're like some kind of tech wizard, aren't you? Kathira didn't look back. You'd be surprised what one can learn after years of being on the run. Jake's mouth fell open as he watched her work. There was no denying it now. This wasn't just a soldier with a glowing body and a mysterious key. Kathira was a genius, a hacker, and a warrior all rolled into one. Just as Jake was about to say something, the Guardian's entire body froze in place. It emitted a loud mechanical screech, almost as if it were stuck mid-thought, its lights flickering erratically. And then, silence. Kathira turned, her grin widening as she strolled back toward Jake, her movements now smooth and casual, as if she'd just taken out a stubborn vending machine that wouldn't accept her coin. Jake, still staring at the frozen Guardian, shook his head in disbelief. Okay, now I'm impressed, he said. That was... Honestly, I thought you were going to get us both killed. But that was kind of badass. Kathira shrugged, her smile only widening. Told you I had something better. She glanced back at the Guardian, which was still standing motionless, completely under her control. For now, at least. I've only locked down its movement systems. It'll take it a minute to reset, but we should move while it's still confused. Yeah, we're moving all right. Jake was already backing away from the still form of the Guardian. The only question is, where to next? Kathira pointed down the tunnel, where the darkness seemed to deepen, and a low rumble filled the air. We go deeper, she said simply. The control hub is located beneath the central generator core. That's where we'll find access to the fleet data. She gave him a look. And no, we won't be getting distracted by anything else. Stay focused. Jake smirked, feeling a surge of exhilaration despite the danger. Oh, I'm staying focused. Don't worry. I'm really good at staying focused. Just ask my therapist. Focus, Jake, Kathira replied, her tone shifting into something more serious. We're almost there, but the real danger is still ahead. Jake, for once, didn't joke. He had no intention of taking Kathira's words lightly. The closer they got to the central generator, the more he could feel the tension creeping back, like the calm before a storm. They were about to face something much bigger than the Guardian. He had no doubt about that. And yet, as they moved deeper into the tunnels, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that, with Kathira at his side, there might just be a chance they could pull this off. The odds were slim. The stakes were high. But right now, for the first time in a long time, Jake felt like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't completely alone in this fight. All right, he said, adjusting his gear and glancing at her. Let's save your people. But I'm telling you right now, if we get through this, I'm taking you out for a drink, my treat. Kathira shot him a side-eye, but her lips twitched in what could almost be called a smile. We'll see, she said. For now, let's keep moving. And so, the two of them, an unlikely pair of scavenger and soldier, slipped deeper into the belly of the forgotten base, ready to face whatever came next, with a plan, a few laughs, and a lot of luck. The deeper they went, the more the tunnels seemed to close in on them. The concrete walls, once decorated with faint traces of alien graffiti and blinking lights, were now cracked and peeling, as though the entire structure was decaying from the inside out. Jake had never been claustrophobic, until now. Kathira, however, moved like she belonged here, her steps sure and steady. She knew these tunnels, even in their decaying state. He couldn't help but marvel at her calm, but there was something else in her eyes, something focused, determined. She was all business now, and it was contagious. How far are we from this control hub? Jake asked, trying to keep the conversation light. It wasn't working. The closer they got to whatever was ahead, the more his stomach twisted in knots. "Not far," Kythera answered, her voice low but confident. "Just a few more levels down. We're almost there." Jake raised an eyebrow. "A few more levels? What is this, the world's worst elevator ride?" Kythera didn't answer. She didn't even flinch. She just kept moving, as if they weren't walking through a crumbling alien base about to hack into who knows what kind of top-secret military files. Jake's nerves were already on edge, but he wasn't about to let his unease show. He had a reputation to uphold, even if it was just with Kythera, and maybe, just maybe, the whole alien galaxy at large. "So, what exactly is in this control hub anyway?" Jake asked, pushing forward and trying to ignore the constant hum of unseen machines vibrating beneath the floor. "Is it like a super-secret computer that holds the key to saving your people, or is it just a bunch of alien spreadsheets?" Kythera shot him a sideways glance, and Jake couldn't help but notice the glimmer of amusement in her expression. "It's not spreadsheets, Jake. It's access to the fleet's command center. The Zentari took it from us years ago. Without it, we're stuck in the dirt." She paused, her gaze darkening. "If I can get to the mainframe, I'll be able to re-establish control. We can launch the counteroffensive, but we need to act fast." Jake nodded, his mind racing. The implications of what she was saying were starting to sink in. This wasn't just some mission to steal a bit of alien technology. It was a full-blown war effort. They were standing at the precipice of something far bigger than a couple of smugglers trying to make a quick escape. Okay, I'm with you," Jake said, grinning in spite of the gravity of it all. "Let's take down the Zentari and, save the day." He paused. "But if we don't make it, I expect my funeral to be held on a beach with at least one pineapple-themed cocktail, all right?" Kythera didn't smile. "Focus, Jake." Right. He cleared his throat. "I'm focused." They reached a thick metal door, a security checkpoint that looked far more sophisticated than anything they had passed so far. Jake looked at Kythera, who stepped up without hesitation and knelt to a small panel next to the door. "Ready for another round of hacking?" she asked, her voice lighter than before. "Is it ever not hacking with you?" Jake shot back. Kythera gave him a small smirk, then her fingers flew over the interface. The glowing symbols flashed in front of her like a cascading waterfall of alien code, each one slipping into place as she deciphered it with a speed that made Jake dizzy just watching. He had no idea what any of it meant, but he didn't need to. All he needed to know was that Kythera was good, and whatever happened next, he was trusting her to get them through it. After a moment, the panel beeped in a satisfied tone, and the door slid open with a low groan of protesting metal. Jake let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Nice," he said. "Next time we need to break into a bank, I know who to call." Kythera's face remained serious, but the corners of her lips twitched upward. "You'll be the first on my list." The door revealed a dark, circular chamber. It was like stepping into the heart of the beast. A massive central core hummed in the center of the room, pulsating with the eerie light of alien technology. Racks of wires and cables spiraled up the walls like some great mechanical spider's web, each one humming with a quiet intensity. Jake stepped forward, his boots echoing through the room. "This is it, huh?" Kythera nodded, her eyes scanning the space as though searching for something. "Yes, this is the mainframe. If I can access the command terminal in the center, we'll have control of the entire fleet." Jake had no idea how she was going to pull that off, but from everything he'd seen so far, doubting Kythera was like doubting gravity. "All right, so let's do this, Captain." He gave her a half salute, though it was more of a joke than anything else. "But if this goes sideways, I'm going to be real upset. I had plans for the weekend." Kythera didn't respond immediately. She moved toward the central terminal, her footsteps measured, calculated. As she approached, the light from the core seemed to intensify, flickering erratically. The hum grew louder, filling the room with an ominous vibration. Jake's instincts kicked in. "Wait, what's going on? This doesn't feel right. Kathira's hand froze just before it reached the terminal's interface. Her eyes narrowed. I knew it, she muttered. What? What's going on? She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. The system's been corrupted. The Zentari aren't just controlling the fleet. They've locked this down. This terminal is a trap. Jake's mind raced. So, this whole thing is just— Yes, Kathira interrupted, her voice cutting through the tension. We've been walking into a trap this entire time, but now that we're here we have to make a choice. Jake swallowed. He wasn't prepared for this. Traps weren't part of the plan. And the choice is? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Kathira's eyes flashed with something fierce. Determination, fear, anger, all rolled into one. We either fight our way out and destroy the mainframe, or we risk everything to turn it against them. Jake felt a bead of sweat form on his brow. Well, I've always wanted to see a spaceship blow up, but that sounds like we're walking into another fight, the kind I'm terrible at. Then we better be quick, Kathira replied, her tone steely. Let's see how good we really are at surviving. And just like that, the stakes went from bad to worse. They had no backup, no clear plan, and a trap closing in around them. But Jake didn't hesitate. If there was one thing he had learned in his life, it was this. When you're standing on the edge of a cliff, you either jump or get shoved. So, any chance you have a secret escape hatch? Jake joked, hoping to lighten the mood. Kathira didn't laugh. Not unless you're willing to jump through a few layers of rock. Jake raised his eyebrows. Now that I'd like to see? Jake's heart was racing as the air around them vibrated with the electric hum of the corrupted terminal. The walls of the chamber felt like they were closing in. The hum of the mainframe now a deep, resonating growl that sent a tremor through the floor beneath their feet. Every instinct he had screamed at him to run, but Kathira wasn't moving, her face locked in a mask of concentration. So, Jake said, trying to break the mounting tension, this was all a trap? And now we're what? Sitting ducks in a room that's about to turn into a toaster? Kathira didn't glance at him. Not if we act quickly. If we disable the core, we can override the lockout before the Zentari— She paused, her eyes flicking to the terminal. Or whatever they've set in motion, finish whatever they're planning. Great, Jake said, forcing a half smile. You're really painting a picture here. So what happens if we don't get this core disabled in time? Giant explosion? Self-destruct? Or just a very polite request to leave? He was trying to keep his nerves in check, but the situation was starting to feel less like an action movie and more like a bad dream. Kathira shot him a look that made it clear she wasn't in the mood for humor. No, Jake. Worse. The mainframe is linked to the central weapon systems. If the Zentari trigger it, we'll have an orbital bombardment on our heads within minutes. They'll wipe out every last resistance fleet in the sector. Jake blinked. Oh, that's reassuring. Glad you're paying attention. The terminal in front of them flickered, and for a second, Jake thought he saw something move on the screen. A small red dot blinking in the corner. It was subtle, but it was enough to make him freeze. You're telling me we're seconds away from becoming a crater, and we're just standing here? He asked, his voice rising. I mean, I don't want to be the guy who says I told you so, but didn't anyone ever tell you about the too late point in a rescue mission? Kathira gave him a sidelong glance, clearly trying to suppress a smile. If you'd prefer, you can go ahead and hack the system yourself. I'm sure it'll go very well. Jake groaned, but in a way that conveyed the odd mixture of terror and adrenaline coursing through his body. You're a cruel woman, Kathira. No, she said, her voice soft but firm. I'm the person who's going to save your life. The corner of Jake's mouth twitched. I'll give you points for style, but please tell me you have a plan for what happens when we're out of time. I always have a plan, she said with an air of quiet confidence. That's when the first tremor hit. It was like the whole chamber shuddered beneath them, a violent ripple in the air that made the walls groan in protest. Jake's breath hitched. You didn't mention that. Kathira didn't answer. her fingers a blur on the interface as she accessed layers upon layers of encrypted code. She seemed unfazed by the shake, but Jake's sense of urgency was growing. The temperature in the room was rising too, the steady hum of the terminal now accompanied by a low, steady heat that made the air thick and suffocating. The tremors came again, this time stronger, shaking the room like an earthquake. The central core began to pulse with a violent glow. The sound of a distant alarm began to fill the air, growing louder by the second. Kathira? Jake said, suddenly feeling very much like a guy caught in a firestorm. This doesn't seem like a good time to be testing your plan now. Kathira's fingers slowed. For the first time, Jake could see the cracks in her confidence. They've initiated a failsafe. The system's activating its secondary defenses. We need to override the access restrictions now, or we're done. Jake turned and scanned the room, his mind racing. Great. Secondary defenses. I bet this is going to be real fun. Kathira's hands moved faster. I can access the override codes, but I need time. Hold them off for a few seconds. Jake's eyes widened. Hold them off? Hold what off? A low growl came from the dark recesses of the chamber. He turned, and his heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just the tremors. It was the sound of footsteps. Out of the darkness emerged a swarm of mechanical sentinels, armored drones, small but deadly. Their glowing red eyes lit up the room like a swarm of angry fireflies, and their metallic bodies shimmered as they powered up. Well, this is great, Jake muttered, reaching for his blaster. I was hoping I wouldn't get to meet the local greeting committee. Kathira didn't flinch, her fingers still dancing over the terminal. Get to work. They won't wait forever. Jake took a step back, moving into position as the first drone advanced toward them, its weapon system heating up. Without thinking, he raised his blaster and fired. The drone's head exploded in a shower of sparks, but it didn't stop. The other drones swarmed forward, their metallic bodies glinting in the strange, pulsing light from the core. All right, I'm officially over this, Jake shouted, firing again. Another drone went down, but it felt like trying to stop a tidal wave with a spoon. More kept coming. Kathira, how much longer? Jake yelled, ducking behind a column as a barrage of energy blasts whizzed past his head. I'm almost there, she called, her voice tight with concentration. Jake took a breath, moving fluidly as more drones closed in. He dodged, fired, dodged again. He wasn't the best marksman. Hell, he wasn't even in the top 50%. But in this moment, with his life on the line, he was aiming with the kind of precision that came with sheer desperation. The drones kept coming, relentless, each shot he fired seeming to slow them only for a second, before they advanced again. How much longer? Jake repeated, his hand starting to tremble as his blaster overheated in his grip. I just need... Kathira's voice faltered. Her fingers danced across the screen faster than Jake thought possible. Done! The entire room seemed to stop. The drones froze mid-step, their red eyes flickering, then dimming to an eerie black. The hum of the terminal subsided, and the alarms went silent. Jake blinked. Wait, what just happened? Kathira straightened, her expression unreadable. I did it. The failsafe's been neutralized, but we're not out of the woods yet. Jake let out a slow exhale. You just took down a whole army of drones, and you're telling me we're not out of the woods? You've got to be kidding me. Kathira glanced at him, her lips twitching. There are still a few things to handle. Right, Jake said, exhaling dramatically. Like surviving the next 5 minutes. Exactly. Kathira turned toward the now deactivated drones. But that was impressive, Jake. Jake blinked, caught off guard. Wait, what? You just complimented me? Kathira raised an eyebrow. You're not terrible under pressure. Jake couldn't help but laugh. Hey, I'll take what I can get. With the drones deactivated and the system unlocked, they were closer than ever to finishing their mission. But in the deepening silence of the chamber, both of them knew one thing. This was only the beginning. The hum of the now quiet chamber seemed deafening as Jake and Kathira stood before the mainframe. The last of the drones lay in heaps around them, their once glowing eyes dark and inert. The central core had finally quieted, its flashing lights dimming to a steady, almost peaceful pulse. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. The kind of silence that comes when everything is about to change, but you don't know how yet. Kathira stood still, her eyes focused on the mainframe's terminal, but Jake could tell her mind was elsewhere. She had done it. They had done it. But the relief hadn't come. There was still more to do, and something in the air told him that whatever they were facing next, it wasn't going to be simple. "You look like you're waiting for the other shoe to drop," Jake said, trying to break the tension. Kathira shot him a quick glance, her lips twitching slightly as though she was holding back a smile. "I'm not worried, Jake. I'm just calculating the next step." "Next step, huh?" Jake leaned against one of the now dormant drones, his fingers tapping absent-mindedly on the metal. "You know, after all this, I could really go for a nice cold drink, maybe an alien margarita or something." He grinned. "You know, to celebrate." Kathira smirked, though the tension still clung to her posture. "I think I'd rather have a drink when the war's over." Jake straightened, watching her carefully. "You know," he said, his voice softer now, "I didn't think you'd care. About the war, I mean. I figured you were just all business, you know, just doing your job." He paused. "But after all this, I think you care a lot more than you let on." Kathira didn't respond right away. She just stared at the terminal, her mind working through the data, her fingers tapping out a rapid sequence of commands. The air between them was heavy, the weight of their journey pressing down on both of them. The mission was far from over. But for the first time, Jake sensed the full depth of Kathira's resolve, and something else, something human, beneath the cold warrior exterior. "I care," she said at last, her voice quiet but firm. "More than you know. But I've learned that if you care too much, you lose your edge." She glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "I wasn't going to make the same mistake twice." Jake nodded slowly, processing her words. "I get it. You've got your walls up, Kathira. You don't want to lose anyone else, but we're not the same as we were when we started, are we?" She didn't answer, but the flicker of emotion in her eyes told him everything he needed to know. They had both changed, whether they were ready to admit it or not. The silence lingered, and Jake turned his attention back to the terminal. Kathira was still typing at a breakneck speed, the interface flashing with rapid streams of data. "Almost there," she murmured. "The fleet systems are in disarray, but I can reroute their command center now. We just have to hold out long enough." "Hold out long enough," Jake repeated, the weight of her words sinking in. "Yeah, because it's always the holding out part that gets me." Suddenly, the air around them shifted. A deep rumble reverberated through the walls of the chamber, and Jake felt a pulse of fear trickle down his spine. The room began to shake again, less like an earthquake this time, more like a massive engine powering up. The walls groaned as the mainframe whirred to life once more. "Hold out for how long?" Jake asked, his voice tight with concern. Kathira's fingers were still flying over the console, her concentration unwavering. "Long enough for the backup signal to reach the fleet. The Zentari are going to try and lock us out again. We need to buy time." "And how exactly do we buy time in a room full of dead drones and one very pissed-off mainframe?" Jake asked, pacing the room. "I'm thinking we're a little out of options here. I have one more card to play." Kathira's eyes locked onto his, her gaze intense. "But it's risky." Jake stopped pacing. "What kind of risky?" She took a breath, exhaling slowly. "I'll have to trigger a full system reset. It'll cut off the Zentari's command signal for a short time, long enough to give the fleet a fighting chance, but it also means the base will go into total lockdown mode. We'll be stuck in here until we can figure out a way to get out." Jake thought for a moment. "You know, this is the part where I usually run for the exit." "You're not going anywhere." Kathira's voice was firm, a hint of a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. And you're going to help me with this. Great, Jake said, putting his hands up in mock surrender. Next thing you know, you're going to ask me to hack the entire alien network while blindfolded. Kathira's grin was fleeting, but it was there. But I do need you to hold this. She handed him a small glowing device, something he didn't recognize but assumed was important. When I trigger the reset, this will stabilize the command flow. If we're going to win this, we'll need this device to ensure the reset isn't reversed. Jake raised an eyebrow. You just carry that around with you? Kathira gave a small shrug. Always prepared. The rumble in the chamber grew louder, the walls creaking with a mechanical groan. It was now or never. All right, let's do this, Jake said, gripping the device tightly in his hand. But if this doesn't work, I'm blaming you. Kathira didn't reply. Her focus was absolute as she keyed in the final sequence. And then, everything went silent. For a brief, terrifying moment, Jake thought they had failed. But then, slowly, the mainframe let out a soft, mechanical hum, followed by the distinct sound of the systems rebooting. Lights flickered to life, and the terminal before them came alive with new commands scrolling across the screen. We did it, Kathira said, almost in disbelief. She turned to Jake, her eyes wide with a mix of relief and triumph. We actually did it. Jake let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Well, I'll be damned. And then, as the weight of the victory settled over them, Kathira did something she hadn't done since they first met. She smiled, just a little, but it was enough. Jake grinned back, unable to suppress the relief that flooded his chest. All right, Jake said, clapping his hands together. Now that we've saved the galaxy, or at least a good chunk of it, what's next? A beach? A drink? Maybe a quiet retirement? Kathira's smile faded, but her voice softened. Next, we fight. For freedom. For our people. She glanced at him. But you're right about one thing. A drink sounds good. After all this, we've earned it. Jake laughed, shaking his head. You know, I wasn't expecting to go from smuggler on the run to galactic hero in the span of a few days. But hey, at least it wasn't boring. They both turned toward the exit, ready to face whatever challenges awaited them. They had made it through the impossible. And somehow, despite everything, they had come out stronger for it. As they stepped into the corridors of the now rebooted base, the promise of a new beginning lay before them. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were a team, and in a galaxy on the brink of war, that might just be the greatest victory of all. The door slid shut behind them, sealing away the past, and as the final echoes of their footsteps faded into the silence, the future had already begun.